Hello friends, this is Gail Anderson and this is Mentoring Moments for Moms. I know a lot of you do not join us live and that's great. Whenever you have time during the day, catch the replays on YouTube. Always appreciate those of you who are watching and giving me feedback and giving me new things to talk about because I always hear from my listeners. It's really cool. One of the things that has come up recently is people are talking about setting limits for your kids. I call it boundaries. Hey, if you like what we're talking about today, don't forget to tap on the screen. Give me some hearts. Show me you appreciate what we're talking about. So we're talking about boundaries, having some sort of boundaries or limits for your kids. And I know that sounds kind of like, oh, do I really want to do that? But there are several reasons that boundaries are good. There is a security in the boundaries. It gives consistency to life. Talk about something else. Thanks. Yeah, I really appreciate you being on today. Okay, anyway, boundaries are a sign of love as well. It shows that we love our children enough to help them until they can make good choices themselves. It really helps in a household, a family where you have at least a few kids. It gives peace when you have some kind of limits or consistency for the kids. It's just part of the order we have to have in our household. Now, I tend to function better when we have schedules and boundaries and limits, but I did have 5 children too, and that made it necessary to have some sort of structure in our household so that there was peace. And I think everybody has different levels of boundaries, but in a household with children, some boundaries have to be put in place. It is essential. So just talking about boundaries being a sign of love, when I grew up, I noticed my parents had a lot of rules, restrictions for us, especially as young teenagers. And other kids seemed to like to come to my house rather than be at their house where their parents had no rules, no restrictions, no anything. They felt more loved, they felt more secure in a household where there was boundaries. And I'm sure you've seen that yourself. So we all have some boundaries for children. And I'm going to give an example here, and I hope I don't step on anybody's toes. But if you are using boundaries in this way, where you are telling your child that they have to obey by the time you count to 3 or to 5 or to 10, that type of thing is actually setting the boundary at whatever number you have told them they have to obey by. So if you say you have to obey by the time I count to 10, I'm going to start counting, you better obey, they're probably going to obey at 9.5. They know the boundary, they know how far out they can go before you will do something. So that's not really, in my opinion, the best way to handle that. They will find out how far they have to go out to actually reach the boundaries, because we all have boundaries somewhere, even if they're way far out. Your kids will feel more loved, you'll have a better relationship if you operate with some type of boundaries. Now, I've often noticed with 2-year-olds that they are always pushing and pushing and pushing. In fact, people have called it the terrible twos. They're not terrible. They're just testing and testing. They want to know where the limits are in their life so that they can feel secure within those limits. And it takes that time when they're 2 years old to keep testing and finding out where those limits are, finding out when mom and dad do something to stop them. And that actually can make them turn into a trusting 3 because they feel more secure, they know where the boundaries are. Thanks for joining us today. If you like what we're talking about, tap on the screen, give me some hearts, and you can swipe to the right and share this broadcast if you want to. Okay, so let's talk about what types of boundaries you might want to have. I'm just going to put them under some headings here just so that you can, hey Kimberly, good to see you. I hope it's Kimberly. Anyway, safety. You know, you want them to play in the yard, not out on the road. You don't want them touching the stove or using the microwave. You know, if we're talking teenagers, that of course doesn't apply. But I'm talking with younger kids, preschool, elementary. What other things under safety? Let's see here. Don't use knives. You don't want them taking something out of the oven for you, even if you are cooking together. You just don't want a little one doing that. So you have to have things that are appropriate for their age. Then there's boundaries that have to do with courtesy, like just asking to go to a friend's house. You know, if you have an elementary age child and he decides to go to a friend's house after school and doesn't say anything or ask for permission, you have no idea where he is. There's the courtesy of knocking before you enter a room where the door is closed. That's just a common courtesy thing, but it's a boundary that we set up in our household, which is a very good thing to do, especially when you're thinking of other people. How about asking before you use something of someone else's? Even if you know Johnny will let you use his Nintendo machine or something, you have to ask. It's just a courtesy. So those are just different boundaries under courtesy. Then there's the most important boundaries, especially for our preschool and early elementary kids, and that is the physical needs of a child. You should have boundaries for nap time. You know, it's not a child's choice whether he takes a nap or not. He is going to take a nap. This is just something that we do. Bedtime is not usually negotiable. You set up a bedtime because you know how much sleep your child needs, and you base those boundaries on the physical needs of the child. Something like screen time, you know, whether that be a Nintendo type game or a Game Boy or even watching shows on a computer. Those are the things that you really want to look at and decide, okay, what are the boundaries I want to have? I've got to have some kind of boundaries for my children so that we're all safe, so that we're all happy, so that our household is in some type of order, and I'm not allowing kids to do anything they want at any time during the day. So, what are types of boundaries that you guys think about with your kids? One of the things I like to also have as a boundary in my house is food. You know, we like to not have food in any other area except the kitchen, because then it keeps the mess in the kitchen, not all over the living room. Just about what foods to eat. I didn't always give my kids a choice, especially at dinner time. This is what we're having, and the only option here would be if you take a few bites of what we're serving, then I'll give you a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. That's the only other option. Otherwise, you become a short order kitchen. Okay, Billy wants this, Susie wants this, Sarah wants that, and you're fixing everything that they want. That is going to be a lot of time and energy on mom's part, and it's going to make you a very harried mom, which is not what you want to be. You want to enjoy your kids, you want to have a peaceful home and a home that's in order. Let's say snacks. Do we have snacks or don't we? Whether we have fruit for snacks or whether we can have candy for snacks. Those are things that you kind of want to decide ahead of time, because when you have those boundaries, then the kids function within them and realize, okay, this is what we do, especially for a preschooler. Okay, we go to the bathroom, we brush our teeth, we have a story, and then we go to bed. It's just what we do. They get to the point where that consistency helps them understand and appreciate the boundaries, and then they're not pushing against them so much. You have to watch out with preschoolers that you don't give too many choices. For instance, if you're taking them to their closet in the morning and saying, what do you want to wear today? And they have a whole closet full of summer and winter clothes, you are setting yourself up for quite a battle, I'm sure, because they're probably going to choose something that's not appropriate for the weather or not appropriate for what they're doing today. But taking a preschooler and giving them one is not a choice. 2 or 3 choices is awesome. Then they have freedom within those boundaries. It's cold out today, so you know they're going to wear pants, and you know they need a long sleeve shirt, but they might be able to choose between 2 things. And that gives them some of that freedom. So no matter what kind of personality your child has, no matter how much freedom he has, or how much freedom he needs for his type of personality, if you have those boundaries there, and you give some freedom or choice within those boundaries, you are both going to win. And again, that's going to bring a lot more peace in your home. So just a couple of reminders. Again, give freedom where you can within those boundaries. The most important thing is that they do have a choice. Even if it's just a choice between two things, they still had a choice. And that helps them to feel a little bit independent. Don't allow choices where you shouldn't. And one of the biggest examples for me would be with junior high or high schoolers who don't want to attend church with the family. Well, this is part of our family. This is part of our culture. We go to church. And so you go to church together. That should not be a choice. Now, when they're off on their own, that's great. They can do what they want. But while they're in your home, this is what we do. This is the culture we have built. The third thing is provide some follow through. Gosh, there are no boundaries unless there is follow through to show that those boundaries are really there. If you say you cannot take food from the fridge without asking, and your child is all day long going in the fridge and taking food without asking you, then what's happening? He realizes that's not a boundary, that's not a rule here, I can do whatever I want. There has to be some follow through. So when your kids are obeying those boundaries, when they're staying within the limits, when they're obeying the house rules, especially when you're training those, give them reinforcement for it. Verbal reinforcement, stars, stickers, whatever. But if they cross those boundaries, then there should be a consequence. And this is essential to show that those boundaries are really there. We're not just blowing smoke saying that they're there and they're not. Okay, so boundaries have to be reinforced in order to actually have boundaries in your home. Any questions you guys have, please go ahead and shoot them up on the screen. I don't want this just to be about me and my experience and what I've done in my household. I want to hear from you guys, especially if you have questions. We had certain ages when the kids got to junior high and high school where I actually kept track in a book. I called it the Book of Ages. Okay, you have to be at least 10 years old to use the lawnmower. I mean, there were things my kids wanted to do at very young ages. And so we decided, okay, this has to be an earned privilege. This is not something we want to do when they're really young. We want to be safe. So different things like that. Bedtimes, how many nights they could have social activities, other privileges around the house. And that, of course, entered into the scene a little bit when we got to driving. And that all came with teenagers as some formal contracts that we drew up, which was a great way to handle boundaries with teenagers. Absolutely awesome. Benefits for staying within those boundaries and consequences for crossing those boundaries. So it actually went great. Also want to say that you should give some explanation to them about the boundaries. When they're younger, there doesn't need to be too much explanation, but the older they get, the more explanation there is. And actually, as they get older, you drop back on those boundaries. You start tapering them out so that they're able to leave your household, able to make choices and decisions that are good for them and good for others as they enter into the world. So one of the examples for that is a situation where you tell your child, okay, don't throw trash on our grass. You know, when Daddy mows, he doesn't want to have to pick up trash. Well, that's great, but the child is not going to generalize to other situations. In order to generalize that, you need to say, oh, we shouldn't be throwing trash on the ground. Trash goes in the trash can. This way they can generalize from your yard to the park, to the shopping center, and they understand that we don't throw trash on the ground because it looks bad, because somebody else might be coming by and stepping on it. We want to think of other people. So always have some kind of explanations. Again, with younger ones, it's really, really short. Thanks for those hearts. Glad you appreciate what we're talking about today. Another biggie is to have your child not question you when you tell them to do something. And that is a really hard thing to train ourselves to do, not to answer their questions. But we want our children to pretty much obey right away, and then you'll be happy to explain it afterward. Now, this is something we teach in children's church. We obey right away. I mean, that is a great thing to teach when they're young. If you look at the situation where your child is running out in the street to get a ball and there's a car coming, you don't want them standing there in the middle of the street and turning to you and saying, "Why, Mommy, why?" No, you obey first and then say, "Why, Mom? Why did I have to do that? Help me understand." That's great. There's nothing wrong with explaining it, but that explanation only comes after they obey. Now think back on your own lives. Can you think of structure or boundaries or rules that you now appreciate as an adult, now that you have your own family? Can you appreciate any of those things that your parents did? I know I do. My parents had boundaries as far as curfews. They had boundaries as far as friends. Of course, things were a little bit looser when I was growing up. Today, we have to be a lot more stringent with our kids and where they are and what they do. Can't be off riding around the neighborhood like I used to be as a girl. But I appreciate those boundaries. I appreciate the things that my parents did for me as far as teaching me how to have boundaries and disciplines with my money. Helped me as an adult tremendously. So another thing is, in having these boundaries, it's something that it's good to discuss with your spouse. Sit down and say, "Honey, we probably should do this. Where should we start? What boundaries are good? What boundaries did you have as a kid that you can appreciate? What should we do?" So be together on that, because when your spouse is watching the children, you want those same boundaries to be rewarded or consequenced. You have to understand that your kids will not appreciate probably those boundaries when they're in your home and you have them. We can't expect our kids to appreciate all those things we do. But when we are doing them with the right learning, the right training, the right education, and with the right motivation, that we love them and we want them to turn out to be great members of society, then we want to do those things. We want to have those boundaries. There will come a day when they will appreciate them. It is amazing, after my kids got out of my home, how they came back and thanked me for so many things that we did. And now that they're having kids of their own, oh my gosh, it is so gratifying to hear them come back and say, "Man, I'm so glad you did that, and remind me how you did this, and why did you do this so I can understand, because I know it worked and I just want to know why it worked." And then they're implementing a lot of the same things with their own kids. So it's awesome. I also want to recommend a book, Boundaries with Kids: When to Say Yes and How to Say No by Henry Cloud. It's difficult when a 7-year-old has a different boundary than a 3-year-old for the younger guy. Absolutely, and I'm so glad you brought that up. I'm going to just take off here for just a second on that. That was part of the reason that I had that spiral bound notebook called the Book of Ages. If you give the 3-year-old the same privileges that the 7-year-old has, it actually is almost like a slap in the face to the 7-year-old. He has earned that privilege by age and by showing his responsibility. If you put a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old to bed at the same time, that is not good. If you're not showing differentiation, then that older one is going to feel like they're being treated with the whole mass of little ones. And you can't do that. I have seen it happen time and time again. As they grow, they need to see that you are appreciating their wisdom of their age, the fact that they have obeyed the rules and boundaries that you've had, and there are privileges that come with age. And if your 3-year-old is having a hard time with that, then I say, when you are 7, you're going to get to do that too. And when you're 6, you're going to get to do this. I actually made the book because it helped me keep track. And my kids just laugh looking at it now. But it helped me keep track so that I could be good with making sure those boundaries were the same. And my kids loved it, that they knew when they reached a certain age, they were going to be able to have these privileges or stay up later or whatever. But the difference between a 3 and 7-year-old, that's easy. Now, when you have some that are 14 months apart, that's a little more difficult, but you still need to show that difference between them. When I babysit for my grandchildren, the 4-in-1 family, their ages are almost 2 years apart. And rather than taking older ones and putting them to bed and younger ones and putting them to bed, my favorite thing to do, I don't do it all the time, is to spend 30 minutes with each one before their bedtime, and that way you stagger every bedtime. Now, you can't do that every night, but as a grandma, I can do it more often than you, obviously. But it's great because they each get some specific time with me, and then they have a different bedtime than the other children. So that works tremendous. You will be amazed at how much more confident, how much more rewarded your older child feels when they have been separated out like that and giving privileges. Thanks, appreciate that. So I hope this has helped you. My email is in the profile on Periscope. Would love for you to email me. Give me your comments, questions, what other things you want to hear about. I'll probably talk about boundaries a little bit more on next week. But at this point, I will put the link to that book by Henry Cloud in the notes when I put this on YouTube today. That way you can, I think it runs like $7.58. And Henry Cloud is fabulous on boundaries. Boundaries in relationships, marriage, work. I mean, excellent, excellent information. And this will help reinforce you in understanding why it's so important, and maybe something that you need to share with your spouse so that he can get on the same page as well. Also, I want to let you know that we do blog at KirbyAnderson.com. Would love for you to get on there. We blog on marriage, parenting, health, and personal development. All you have to do is go in the search box and plug in parenting, and you will see the boatloads of blogs that we've written on that subject. You can pick and choose what sounds interesting to you. But till next time, make a choice in your household that will make your parenting more rewarding and more fun for your kids. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks again for watching.